Reporters dug up new information this week in the killing of Trayvon Martin. Renee Stutzman of the Orlando Sentinel obtained the confidential account of what George Zimmerman told police in Florida, that he had been accosted by the teenager.
The two exchanged words that Trayvon struck a blow, punched George Zimmerman in the nose, and that floored Mr. Zimmerman.
But that account, and one in the Miami Herald, we'll talk to that reporter ahead, seemed only to harden the ideological divide in the coverage. When you turn on MSNBC, it's like watching the prosecution against Zimmerman, with any guest sympathetic to the Neighborhood Watch captain being grilled and even badgered.
He was walking with Skittles and an iced tea when he was shot dead. But now we're seeing new pictures of Trayvon, and they're trying to portray him as a thug.
And there seems to be a right-wing media campaign to defend George Zimmerman.
How are you paying your expenses if you're not working? Is someone paying you to do this for George?
No, no one is paying me to do this for George. Now,
have you ever heard George Zimmerman scream?
You know what? What is the point of you asking me questions if you're not giving me an opportunity to answer? Okay?
Answer the question.
And as far as George raising his voice, yeah, I've heard him raise his voice before.
Scream.
Not in anger.
Scream.
Not in anger.
Scream.
Would you know what, why are we having this discussion if you're not listening? If you're not listening to my answer.
And when you turn on Fox News, it's like watching the Zimmerman defense, with considerable skepticism toward Trayvon Martin's side.
This was described in the beginning as being shot in cold blood.
Right. Well, this was never portrayed in the media as being a fight. This was portrayed as a cold-blooded murder.
Zimmerman's side is saying that George Zimmerman told his father that, in fact, he was walking back to the car, and it was Trayvon who confronted him and threatened him and broke his nose and put these lacerations in the back of the head. Are you denying that that's a possibility?
Let me take you back, okay? You know that there's a young lady's
You can take me back, but is that a possibility that Trayvon broke his nose and pounded his head into the cement? Is that possible?
Well, it's quite possible, because he was the one that instigated the incident when he got out of the vehicle, out of the advice, and became a vigilante. He started the fight with Trayvon.
So is the media coverage starting to deepen the polarization surrounding this tragedy? Joining us now in Boston, Callie Crossley, host of the Callie Crossley Show on WGBH Radio, and here in Washington, Frank Sesno, director of the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University, and the creator and host of Planet Forward. Frank Sesno, what do you make of the way you saw those clips that many at MSNBC and Fox News have blatantly chosen sides in this case?
Welcome to the Sausage Factory. You know, we've taken the deep dive into the deep end of all the problems and issues and history we've got with race in this country, and people are choosing sides. The perfect storm is that the media have chosen sides, with Fox on one side of virtually all issues and MS on the other, and they've just got to stake out their claims in their territories. So it's one-upsmanship with the outrage now. The problem is that the real journalism of this story is getting short shrift. The real journalism of this story is what happened, and that's not what those conversations are engaging.
And even when the journalists attempt to provide new information, Callie Crossley, for example, ABC obtaining the police video of George Zimmerman after he was arrested, and people who don't who think he's the assailant here say, look, no wounds, he's not bleeding, and other people have a different interpretation. It seems like the reporting on both sides, by the columnists, by the commentators, that the new information just gives them more to argue about.
And there'll be more now, because the Orlando Sentinel has just engaged two voice experts to look at to listen to the 911 tapes, and both of them came back and said that the voices on the tape crying for help could not be Zimmerman. So that'll just add fuel to the fire. I couldn't agree more with Frank Sesno. And I think what's happening here is there's a great amount of identification. Some people are really identifying with George Zimmerman. This is a guy just trying to protect his neighborhood. And many, many other people, having had the experience of racial profiling, are saying a 17-year-old unarmed kid outweighed by this guy, what else could it be? So you're correct that the journalism is getting lost, and part of that is because what's happening is we're ending up with drib-drab reporting. Here's a drip, here's a drab, and it's nothing that comes together in any one report so that you have a sense of, well, there's this, there's also this. And that is a problem. And part of that is because there's no official investigation, I have to say, in which maybe there would be a way for reporters to attack this in a more holistic way.
Well, I think that's the problem, is that reporters are playing the investigators here in some ways. But because they're doing that, it comes out in dribs and drabs. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what investigators may have.
There's so much we don't know. But But are the commentators who have chosen up signs, Frank Sesno, are they, as Bill O'Reilly, among others, says, are they inflaming potential violence, particularly if Zimmerman ends up not being charged?
Potentially, yes, I think they are. I mean, I think that for a media commentator to, in one moment, participate in a rally and go on the air in the next moment, and then you know, feed all that back, it provides this sort of echo chamber, and it's way beyond the pale of what news organizations and media companies would have allowed.
Since you brought that up, that of course is Al Sharpton of MSNBC, and he was back in Florida again yesterday, leading a rally, asking for George Zimmerman to be arrested, talking about the possibility of civil disobedience while continuing to do his MSNBC show. Now, I was critical of this on the air last week, and Phil Griffin, the president of MSNBC, has since defended Sharpton's dual role, what I would describe as a dual role, telling the AP that we didn't hire Al to be a neutered kind of news presenter. That's not what we do. Well, no one's saying that Sharpton should be neutral, but you know, if he's going to lead a crusade against Zimmerman, how can he continue to be a host of a cable show on the same issue at the same time?
Because he can, and he is, and because the rules have changed. Go ahead. Yes.
Go ahead, Callie.
And I would add, Howie, that this is highly charged. Phil Griffin's response to you was that, well, we knew what he was, and we all do to some degree. But this is so highly charged. I really think that he should do the work that he does with the National Action Network and step aside during this time, because it can't be anything but polarizing with his role on the television show as well. It just can't be anything else.
Right. I mean, there are times when people recuse themselves for one reason or another, and this would be a good one, it would seem to me.
Yeah, or do the show and don't go and address the rallies, because,
choose.
You know, he is appearing with the parents. He accompanied Trayvon Martin's parents to the Justice Department, and then he has them on the show, and of course he's very negative towards Zimmerman.
Well, something else happens, if I may. The deeper he gets in with the family and the others, the more invested he gets in this, and in the emotion of the justifiable, understandable emotion of the family, the more that projects on the television program, and that becomes a very concerning kind of thing.
Callie, you made the point just a moment ago about the way in which some people might identify with Trayvon Martin, others might identify with George Zimmerman. Let me put up on the screen a poll by the Pew Research Center this past week, percentage of people who are following this story most closely of all the stories in the news. For whites, 20%. For blacks, 52%. And I'm wondering what you make of that, and also what strikes you about the difference in which the way in which black journalists and white journalists talk or write about this case.
Well, the difference is that this is very personal to a lot of folks who have written about it. They have experienced a racial profiling that didn't, you know, wonderfully lead to some tragic outcome, as had happened with, or may have happened with Trayvon Martin. But they've been in the scenario, and so they can speak about it from having had at least 3/4 of the experience. And that makes it really personal. And the other part of this is that, you know, black folks often say, is there justice in a sort of blind justice situation? Can we really get justice in this situation? And so they're looking very closely to see that in a case that is as highly charged as it is, with race as the bigger context of this, because, you know, no matter what anybody says, he looks suspicious because he's a black kid. And now what does that mean in the larger context? That's what black folks are looking at quite closely.
I don't have any problem with, let me just jump in here, Callie. I don't have any problem with journalists using their own experience to talk about how perceptions of police and perceptions of violence. But there are some who say, well, when black journalists do this, they're compromising their credibility because they're kind of putting a thumb on the scales.
I don't think that's it at all. I think that what's happening, that survey was not about black journalists. That survey was about black and white Americans and who's following closely.
But I'm just, you know, I read all the columns on this.
For the African American journalists who are covering this, as for a woman who may or may not have had an abortion covering a pro-life rally, as for a gay journalist who's covering gay rights issues, you very much bring your own experiences to that coverage. A good journalist will be able to stop at the water's edge, though, in terms of inserting those experiences into the actual coverage. But being sensitized to how people feel, I mean, we had a huge problem here at CNN years ago because we simply didn't have enough diversity in the newsroom. And when there were suggestions of voting,
you were the bureau chief?
Yeah, when I was the bureau chief, when there were suggestions of voting irregularities, as you recall, down in Florida, because African Americans said they were being harassed, there was some sort of dismissive, not dismissive, but people didn't instantly get it. An African American journalist would have instantly gotten it.
Right.
Even if it's proven not to be true. It's this whole kind of, right, this driving while black thing. A white driver doesn't experience it when you're pulled over. That the first thing you think about is, oh, it's my race.
Reporters dug up new information this week in the killing of Trayvon Martin. Renee Stutzman of the Orlando Sentinel obtained the confidential account of what George Zimmerman told police in Florida, that he had been accosted by the teenager.
The two exchanged words, that Trayvon struck a blow, punched George Zimmerman in the nose, and that floored Mr. Zimmerman.
But that account, and one in the Miami Herald, we'll talk to that reporter ahead, seemed only to harden the ideological divide in the coverage. When you turn on MSNBC, it's like watching the prosecution against Zimmerman, with any guest sympathetic to the Neighborhood Watch captain being grilled and even badgered.
He was walking with Skittles and an iced tea when he was shot dead. But now we're seeing new pictures of Trayvon, and they're trying to portray him as a thug.
And there seems to be a right-wing media campaign to defend George Zimmerman.
How are you paying your expenses if you're not working? Is someone
anger?
Scream?
Would you know what? Why are we having this discussion if you're not listening? If you're not listening to my answer.
And when you turn on Fox News, it's like watching the Zimmerman defense, with considerable skepticism toward Trayvon Martin's side.
This was described in the beginning as being shot in cold blood.
Right. And paying you to do this for George?
No, no one is paying me to do this for George. Now
Have you ever heard George Zimmerman scream?
You know what? What is the point of you asking me questions if you're not giving me an opportunity to answer? Okay?
Answer the question.
And as far as George raising his voice, yeah, I've heard him raise his voice before.
Scream.
Not in anger.
Scream.
Not in